So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to delete all this code again and start over. I'm going to delete that and change the names. Okay. Now let's define a new type called type dev, called, let's say, data wrapper. So this is a new struct, and we have the data wrapper type. So the data wrapper type hold a reference to the next data wrapper. So next data wrapper, and it's also hold, oh, sorry, I want to say it holds the address for the next data wrapper, and it also store a reference to, let's say, the previous data wrapper. Now we have something like, I'm going to just write something like that. If you have wrapper 1 that hold a reference to wrapper 2 and that hold a reference to wrapper 3, which hold no reference to a next wrapper. Now, in this case, the list goes both ways. So each one hold a reference to the next and the previous. Now let's create a function for this. I did not add a data field, but still we can add a data field. For example, I'm going to add a double data field. So these are the field with the underscores are related to the list, and the actual data we store, we don't add an underscore, just a convention. Okay, now let's create a function called data wrapper type create new. And this one will receive a double data type, which represent the data the wrapper should hold. Then we create this new data wrapper. So dw malloc size of data wrapper type. So now that we have a new data wrapper, this new data wrapper, the data it contains is the data. We pass in a double. And next, for now, we don't know what is the next data wrapper, and we don't also know what would be the previous data wrapper. So we're gonna set those fields to null. So these fields, since they hold the reference for the next and the previous, it means we can define a cursor that will allows us to move both ways. We can move forward, we can also move backward. So that's one. But before we use these functions or create an append function, I just want to create these things manually for us to see how it works. So the first thing, I'm going to define a variable called first, and this will create a new data wrapper. The data it contains is, let's say, 69. And then we're going to create a second data wrapper following the same logic. The second, the third, the fourth, and the fifth. So the fifth, create new. So I'm gonna say we created 5 data wrappers. And the first one has 69. The second one will say, let's say I'm gonna say 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So, and since this is each of these items store a reference to the next and the previous one, I'm going to connect them. So the first data, the first wrapper store a reference to the next wrapper, which is the second. The second also hold a reference to the previous. So the previous is the first. So it goes both ways. And we have the third, the second hold a reference to the third. And the third also hold a reference to the second because the second one is a previous to the first one, to the third one. Then the third hold a reference to the fourth. The fourth also has a previous item, which is the third. And what happens? We now have, let's say, the fourth also hold a reference to the fifth. The fifth hold a reference back to the fourth. So it goes both ways. Each item hold a reference to the next and the next hold a reference to the previous one. And which means we can loop through these things starting from the fifth or starting from the first. So we can loop through using the previous field, or we can loop using the next field. For now, I'm going to define a cursor variable. I'm going to set it to null. And then we have the choice. We can loop using the left to right order. I'm going to start from the first, then say while the cursor is different than null, then I'm going to print the data stored. It is a double data type. What could be the former? I don't remember, but I think it is something like LD. And then we have the cursor, then we print the data field. The cursor would move to the next item. So cursor equal cursor underscore next. So we store the address for the next data wrapper in the cursor, and the cursor displays, we use the cursor to display the data stored in there. I'm going to compile the code again and run it. There is a problem. We see 24. Then we see this bunch of numbers. So what is happening